All right, well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the Predictive Coding webinar. We had quite a number of people said they would join. I don't think everybody has joined yet, but we might make a start regardless, and then people can just join in when they're able to. So today we're going to look at predictive coding. We have myself, Allison Stanfield. I'll give an introduction and just talk to some of the early agenda items. And then we have Leonie Taylor with us, who will actually talk more about what predictive coding is, how it works, and so on. We also have from our office Nathan Wigginton, who's our National Sales and Marketing Manager, who will be sitting in, and I believe Jeff Jarrett, our Software Products Manager, is also listening in. Now, please feel free, if you would like to ask questions, perhaps we'll leave the majority of them till the end, but of course if there's a burning issue that you'd like to ask a question about as we go, please feel free to ask the question. I've also just said if you wouldn't mind just putting your phone on mute until you do want to ask a question, that will help minimise any feedback that we might have. So is there any questions before we get underway about the webinar process? If not, then we might get going. So can you just go back to the agenda, please? So firstly, what we'll talk about is look at some market trends in terms of what's happening in the market, the electronic discovery and I guess legal review market at the moment, and put this into the market context. We'll actually ask what is assisted review and predictive coding. For some of you, I know some of you perhaps have used this before, but for those lawyers who haven't used it before, it's a good way to get an explanation. How does it actually work, and in what scenarios can predictive coding be used? Look at setting expectations for the tool. So like any product, you need to set it up and understand a bit about how it works in order to get the most out of it. And that includes being consistent in the execution of what it is you do to get the most out of the application. We'll look at a case study on how the data is used, how your client can actually realise some cost savings by using this technology. Some people may be interested in the actual technology behind the scenes, so for the technically minded, we'll tell you a bit about how the technology works. And then finally, we'll look at what the courts are saying and what the actual benefits to lawyers are. So the market trends, what we're finding is that the data in cases is actually getting larger and larger. So we may not necessarily have a large claim, so the damages claim may not be particularly large, but in comparison to a few years back, the data that we have to deal with is correspondingly much larger. So that's why the technology is actually becoming more and more useful and is actually gaining more acceptance for this reason, because clients don't necessarily have more money, or it may not be proportional to the case to spend a lot on sifting through the data to actually get to the nub of the case that you're dealing with. Also, if you look at what's happening internationally, then the momentum is actually growing for the use of this technology. And you'll see here on this next slide that compared to only 3 years ago, there is becoming a widespread acceptance of the use of this technology. And you'll see that the most use that the technology is gaining is in North America, followed by Europe, Middle East and Asia. Here in Australia and Asia, it is growing, but obviously compared to the USA, it's still, obviously we don't have as many users here as we do in the States. So predictive coding's been around for quite a while now, but it is gaining momentum slowly. So I guess the question is, why is that? I guess the nature of law firms is generally conservative. They need to be comfortable with any new form of technology that's going to be used, particularly if lawyers perceive that, you know, they need to put their trust into that. had someone else join, but we'll welcome whoever that is, and we'll keep going. We're just talking about why predictive coding has been slow to penetrate the Australian market. And for the newcomer, if I could just get you to put your phone on mute until you ask a question, just it stops any feedback and rustling and so on in the background. That'd be much appreciated. So, yeah.
Hey, Brian, just joining in.
Hello?
Hello, Brian Thornton, just joining in verbally. I can't see anything. You said PowerPoints.
Yeah, that's what we're talking to. So if you can see PowerPoints, that's good.
That's good.
Okay. So thanks for joining the newcomers. We're only on about the second or third slide at the moment, so you haven't missed much. And for the newcomers, if I could just get you to put your phone on mute if possible, unless you'd like to ask a question, it just stops any feedback or rustling in the background and so on. So just getting back to the slow take-up of predictive coding, we're just talking about, I guess, the fact that many law firms perhaps don't necessarily understand the technology. You know, you need to be able to trust it in order to take it up. You know, certainly in law schools, in civil procedure, use of technology isn't really taught, and you know, I think that will come, but for practitioners out there, it's really only webinars like this and other seminars that you actually get to understand and know about this sort of technology. So what we're finding too is that data volumes are just growing and growing. It's just every year we get more and more data being saved, and that has a knock-on effect that as litigators, when clients provide us with information to review for discovery, the volume is just exponentially greater compared to a few years back when you were able to obtain a manila folder for the particular project and so on. These days, the documents contained on hard drives, they're on servers, they're on backup tapes, they're on laptop computers, they could be in the cloud, they could be on mobile devices, and often it's a corralling process to bring together that information before you even start the review process. Obviously, particularly in the current economic climate, there's huge pressure on everyone to reduce costs as much as possible. Clients are expecting lawyers to use ways, if the technology is available, to review information in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible. And then finally, alternative fee arrangements, itemised e-discovery costs topped the list of corporate demand of law firms in 2013, and that's another item we won't touch on today. But you know, what is a reasonable amount of e-discovery costs? And there was a recent case in the US which looked at this. So if anybody's interested, we can talk about that offline. But at the moment, I'll hand over to Leonie to actually talk to you in about more detail about what is assisted review and predictive coding.
Okay, so what is assisted review? So this is essentially automating the document review process with some human input. So it involves training the system, such as your Relativity database, to look at the sort of decisions you've made on some documents, and then Relativity will then look at the remaining document set in the database to then similarly code those documents in the same way. And this sort of classification technology is called categorisation in Relativity analytics. And I'll actually dip into like a 2-minute demo of how categorisation works in Relativity just in a moment. Also, something to note is that this sort of assisted review workflow does need to be QC'd. It's the whole point of the process. You need to, you know, have various passes at the results that the technology has thrown back at you to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. And just to sort of, you know, make it a little bit more relevant for people, it basically works the same as iTunes Genius. So iTunes is obviously, you know, you have your playlist of music, and then you've got your library of music. And iTunes Genius is a way to then look through your remaining songs in your library to bring further songs into your playlist that iTunes considers are similar. So one way to use the system is to, one way to sort of use the analytics technology is for the system to cluster documents together that are of similar concepts. So that's the technology making the decision for you. So it's grouping documents together in clusters that are of similar theme. The predictive coding side of things is where you are training the system to tell you what you're looking for. So you have review teams that will subjectively code a sample set of documents, and based on those decisions, Relativity will then categorize the rest of the documents in the case. So I might just pause there and go into a quick demonstration of just the categorization element in Relativity. So just bear with me. So can everyone now see Relativity? So you have a screen with it's sort of split into two panes, and down the left-hand side you've got categories where they're titled 2000 Presidential Election, California Energy Crisis. If anyone can't see that, just pipe up, but otherwise I'll just keep going. So basically this is the Relativity database, and what you've got in this database is the Enron dataset. So there are 74,000 records in here. What I'm showing you here is a list of categories that a review team has actually come up with. So they've gone into the documents and they've started to identify documents that are relevant to certain categories. So they've identified documents relevant to the 2000 presidential election, the California energy crisis, fantasy football, etc. One particular category here is what I'll talk about is one called property development. So what they have done is Philip Allen at Enron.com he was basically conducting a side property development business while he was working at Enron, and there are emails in there where he's checking up on his property developments, selling them, buying them, etc. So what the review team has done is they've gone in and they've identified 5 example documents. So you'll see here there's an example column here, and they've identified 5 example emails that are relevant to this property development category. And then what Relativity Analytics, or the predictive coding side of Relativity Analytics has done is it will then go through and look at the rest of the 74,000 records in the database, and it's now identified a further 379 items which are also talking about the same sort of thing. So it's similar concepts have been spoken about by Philip Allen, so therefore it should also be categorized in that property development category. So that's just a quick little, I guess, insight into how the categorization works in Relativity, just to get you an idea of how that works. So I'll just go back into the presentation. So the way that the predictive coding element is the workflow side of things. So what it does is it allows the legal review to be partially automated by training the computer to suggest potentially relevant documents based on what the machine has learnt about a pre-manually reviewed seed set, is what it's called. So lawyers will train the engine with an initial sample set, and they'll refine those results until they are confident that the system has reached an acceptable level of, I guess, defensibility in the retrieval of those results. So you can validate those decisions by those Relativity's decisions by manually reviewing statistically relevant subsets, as well as documents that have also not been reviewed yet. So this is all part of the sort of quality checking process to make sure that what you then end up with at the end is an acceptable set of relevant documents that have been partially relevant, partially reviewed by humans, and hopefully mostly reviewed by Relativity. So the idea is that because you've gone through this QC process, and these batches of documents have been validated, you can then be confident in the results. So just to give you, some just a bit of a visual on how that categorization works as well. So here you've got a sort of set of emails, obviously a whole bundle of emails, thousands and thousands of them. The idea is that you've got a human reviewer that will review, a sample set, And then you throw that sample set back into the random bundle, and the predictive coding will identify a further sample set that's also conceptually similar to the sample set you reviewed. And then out of that, you've then got your documents that have been partially reviewed by you and then partially reviewed by Relativity. So just a graph to show how the workflow works. You've got your document set, so I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again with different pictures, but just to give it sort of helps better if you've got graphs, I guess. So you've got your document set, which is subjectively reviewed, a sample set is subjectively reviewed. The document universe is then categorized by Relativity, and the results are validated. And you sort of do that sort of workflow a few passes around until your document set is the the right set that you want to stick with. So when can it be used? So we've seen a lot of cases obviously where there's large amounts of documents and you basically don't have the resource to review them all manually, or you don't have the time. Predictive coding obviously has strong benefits for those sort of matters, and we've seen it in a lot of scenarios such as internal investigations, bankruptcy matters, civil litigation, or those sort of he said, she said type cases such as employment disputes. And we also see that it obviously works the best when you've got more documents. So we see sort of the 25,000 to 100,000 plus document volumes is where it works the best. So the best way to use this system is to make sure that you're training the tool at the outset, so you're putting more effort into the initial review of those sample documents to make sure that you're you're considering those sample set, that sample set, considering that sample set and making sure that you're not just looking at it as to whether it's potentially relevant, but making sure that it's a representative sample across the whole document universe. So it's important that the time in doing this at the outset is spent rather than just a brute force at a normal sort of linear review. So rather than just putting hundreds of paralegals on a document set, you maybe have like one or two senior reviewers at the outset reviewing that sample set to make sure that the decisions on those documents are correct and the documents that you're actually looking at are representative samples of the whole document universe. So with predictive coding, it is important that you know the case, so you know the issues you're looking for, so that when you're reviewing that sample set, you obviously make the right decisions on those documents, and then the technology will work better if you've got those right decisions made on those documents at the outset. So it says, you might not have a lawyer necessarily review the subject matter at the outset. You might have, a particular person at your client's office review a sample set because they're most familiar with the documents and they can maybe issue code them in the right way at the outset. Sorry, did you want to say something? So in terms of when you've got large document sets and you've got like a smoking gun, if technology such as predictive coding or analytics is not used, then it can obviously take a much longer time to find that smoking gun because you're maybe not going about it the right way, or the keyword searches that you're maybe running perhaps aren't bringing back that smoking gun. Whereas if you're using technology such as analytics and predictive coding, it just broadens your search across the document set and potentially will bring back the more relevant documents quickly. So what we're seeing is predictive coding being a lawyer-driven process, so it allows those case review teams to take on larger cases. So you've got medium-sized law firms that potentially don't have the resource to take on and review large document sets for those cases, can now run those sort of cases and quite comfortably run those sort of document reviews if they're using technology such as predictive coding, because you obviously don't need a team of paralegals. You just need a core team that is knowledgeable on the case, and a predictive coding technology will almost do the rest. So where you're using a small sample of documents, it will help you find other relevant documents more quickly and more efficiently, and therefore will improve quality as they are reviewing smaller sets of documents that are, of course, of similar concept.
If I could just add to that, Leonie, an example of that is where, let's say, you've done your privilege review. You may have, say, 500 documents that you've identified as privileged. As a quality check, you can then say to the system, check these 500 documents against all the other documents in the system and tell me if there's anything else that'll like these. And that just gives you a higher level of comfort that you've then checked everything that's possibly privileged. Usually privilege reviews are done by way of looking for the names of the lawyers in the case, the law firms involved, perhaps some specific names that are referred to on the matter, the case name, the court that's involved, and so on. But in that odd instance where there could have been an email or a note sent where potentially some of those keywords are missed, then it just gives you that extra capability of ensuring you've found all of those documents.
So also, predictive coding, the idea is obviously that it reduces the number of non-relevant documents that lawyers will have to review. I mean, it's often the case that you have, a large document set to review, but what you actually discover is perhaps, 5% of that, but you potentially have had to go through, the remaining 94% still to get to that 6% of discoverable material. And predictive coding will reduce that need. So it obviously frees up the lawyer time and allows them to spend more time on actually on their sort of legal strategy and things that are more important for lawyers really than document review.
So the system groups together like documents that are potentially relevant, but on the same token it also groups together documents that are probably irrelevant, like all of the emails about someone's holiday, or we've got an example where a gentleman was emailing a bunch of other women in the organisation about 1,200 emails that were there. They were bunched together. They could be quickly reviewed to determine that they were in fact not relevant, and you could remove those from the data set quickly and easily.
Yeah, so that's why it's also important with the sample set that you're reviewing at the outset will not only include obviously relevant documents to certain issues, but examples of not relevant documents. So the system can also look at those types of documents throughout the rest of the document set. So also, I guess this is maybe a bit harder to sell, but unlike straight manual review of documents by lawyers, the results generated by predictive coding can be validated through statistics. So the argument is that even though people are wary of letting technology do that sort of review, there's been, comments made in the judiciary, certainly in the States, where Allison will speak about in a moment, where it's being commented that this sort of technology review is actually more accurate than manual review. It can be validated by these sort of statistics rather than a straight manual review where it's prone to error by humans. And also, predictive coding techniques will help quality check the process. So it'll identify inconsistently tagged records and allows you to do sort of cross-checking for privilege records prior to discovery. So we have an example of a case study here, which is not a huge document set, so it's probably in that medium range, which would be more likely what we would see here in the Australian market, perhaps. So there were 220,000 documents in the Relativity database. So there were a few, there was some searching done at the outset, just, straight keyword searching, date range searching, which reduced the document set down to 150,000 documents. Now, there weren't that many people in the legal team to review these documents, so, they would have to spend months and months and months reviewing these documents to, to get it to a point where they had a discoverable set. So they used the analytics, the predictive coding element in relativity. So you had a senior lawyer which reviewed a set of 1,500-odd document, which is sort of the recommended set that that they say to review. And it was a randomly selected set of documents, but obviously, a lot of time was taken probably on those 1,500 documents to make sure that the decisions made on them were correct. And that was done to train the system on what was potentially relevant and what was not. And then Relativity categorised the remaining documents. So they took the expert decisions that were made on those 1,519 documents and applied those decisions to conceptually similar documents. So you had then a senior lawyer and junior lawyers check a sample set of these results, and they manually reviewed some further documents to also improve the accuracy of the assisted review of the predictive coding decisions for the remaining documents in Relativity. So at the end of the process, less than 30% of the documents in the database actually needed to be subjected to human review. So the technology reviewed the rest. And I'll just this is sort of some takeaways from that particular case study. So you had total documents considered for assisted review, there were 150,000. Total number of documents reviewed by a senior reviewer, 6,500. So that was at the outset to train the system. You had total number of documents manually reviewed by the junior team, so 34,750. So that was during the various quality checking passes as Relativity returned results from the predictive coding process. So ultimately, including the 6,500 reviewed by the senior reviewer, you had 41,000 documents that were subject to the human review. The percentage of documents identified as not relevant by the assisted review was 80%, and so the percent of total documents ultimately disclosed was 6%. So, you obviously discovered quite a small percentage of that 150,000, but we're using predictive coding, they didn't have to actually manually review all 150,000.
And that's probably a good representative sample. In most discoveries, ultimately what's discovered and obviously compared to what ends up in evidence in a trial, you're going to have a much reduced set of documents compared with what you originally get from a client, particularly if it's a matter where, as I mentioned earlier, the client has documents stored all over the place. Unfortunately, with the nature of technology these days, email and other documents are simply stored. There are organisations out there who spend quite a bit of time on keeping their document management systems up to date and in good order. But generally, in the discoveries we see, it's the opposite. Companies are, with their electronic document management, it is quite disorganised. Stuff is everywhere. You have to sort of corral that and then review it. And of course, with the volume that we're dealing with these days, 150,000 documents to start with is, potentially not that many. So yeah, just looking at the cost. We've worked out that generally using paralegals, it costs around $3.20 per document to subjectively review documents. So just looking at the cost of the 34,750 reviewed by the paralegal, so I haven't included the cost of the senior reviewer because obviously they're much more expensive. You can see there that there's a huge cost difference, if you have to review a much reduced set of documents. Back in the old days where, we had paralegals sitting in rooms reviewing potentially millions of documents, those days have gone. So, any client these days will certainly be interested in seeing a cost saving like that.
We've just included this slide in here, I guess, for the technically minded. I don't know if there's anyone on the line that would be, would know what this means or is interested in this, but I guess it's important that lawyers can rely on this technology and whether it can be trusted. And we've just included this slide to show the technology behind the predictive coding process, and it uses this 6 Sigma grade statistical sampling, which I guess if you wanted to delve into deeper, you could, but we won't. We'll just leave the slide in there for FYI purposes. But it's just important to note that this technology is defensible, I guess, in court matters.
So what are the courts saying? In Australia, I'm not aware of any case law yet which has considered the use of this technology. We've certainly had cases where our clients have thought about using it, but we haven't had a matter yet before the courts. There is a matter in the USA. Judge Peck is a judge who does understand quite a bit about e-discovery. He had this matter of Moore and Publicis Group. Apologies for doubling up on the citation there. Now, he said that using this technology is more accurate than a human review. He says the statistics clearly show that computerised searches are at least as accurately, if not more so, than manual review. He also cited a recent study, and for anyone who's interested, I do have a copy of that study. It's actually quite a lengthy academic study where they take a data set that had already been reviewed by paralegals, and obviously they come up with a result, and they then use technology, and they compared the results, and the technology did produce a more accurate result than what had resulted in the human review. So Judge Peck said, based on that study, in his view, technology-assisted review is more accurate and 50 times more economical than exhaustive manual review. Concluded with Judge Peck saying that the use of predictive coding was appropriate, considering the superiority of computer-assisted review to the available alternatives, that is, linear manual review or keyword searches. Now, keyword searches, obviously we still use keyword searches, but the problem with keyword searches is that you can miss things. If code words are used, you wouldn't necessarily know what they are. So predictive coding and this technology is great, particularly if you don't know what you're looking for or you're trying to find that smoking gun. Judge Peck also said that, or in my view, Judge Peck's decision exemplifies that the whole nature of discovery for lawyers is changing, and we're not going to get away from that. We do have to deal with electronic information. Discovery is all about electronic information. Pretty much all information is created electronically these days. We have to deal with it. So, in his view, he said the legal industry needs to embrace predictive coding and other technological processes, and they will continue to play an increasingly important role in the justice system, and I can't disagree with that. But what he did say, interestingly, he made a point of saying that the bar should take away from this that computer-assisted review is an available tool and should be seriously considered for use in large data volume cases where it may save the producing party or both parties significant amounts of legal fees in document review. So the days of saying, well, we can't do this anymore because it's just going to cost too much, are gone, because we've already got case law saying, well, no, it doesn't have to cost that much because the technology is there, use it. It can actually help you find your way through it without going to significant expense.
So just in summary, we've talked about the numerous benefits for lawyers for their corporate clients to embrace predictive coding technology. And we think it's only a matter of time before the market and the volume of electronic data needed to be reviewed will dictate how this technology is embraced in the Australian market. And as we're seeing, it's already happened in the United States, in the UK, and Europe, or in the UK primarily. So firms will no doubt follow suit in Australia when the time is right. Any questions? Any comments?
It's Tanya here from Lippman Carris. Just a quick question on documents with actually handwritten notes. I suspect that they're not picked up with the predictive coding software.
They're not, but we actually use the near duplication detection software.
Yep.
We haven't touched on in here, but I actually just came from a client that we're working with who actually found a smoking gun with handwritten notes on it by using the near deduplication.
Well, that's pleasing to hear.
Sorry?
But that's good to hear.
Yeah, because what they did was they knew that the client was absolutely adamant that they'd had a conversation with someone on a particular day. The other side denied that, and by reviewing these near duplicates, so documents that were similar, and in this case we had a scanned email with a handwritten note on, and obviously the email in its original electronic format. So they were similar but not identical, so they came up as near duplicates. And in the review process, one of the paralegals actually found this email with the handwritten note on, and he told me that when that email was presented to the person in the witness box, it was game over. They literally settled the case there and then. $20 million, walked away. So, you know, the combination of this predictive coding and the near duplicate detection is really what is driving matters for pretty much all our clients. And you know, we have at least 2 or 3 other matters that I can think of now where we're using this predictive coding analytics software in conjunction with the near duplicate detection. And in fact, in the next version of Relativity, it will include the near duplicate detection as well. So you'll be able to use that all in. I mean, we include it in Relativity now anyway, but we use different software at the moment to determine the differences. So does that answer your question, Tanya?
It does, thank you. I'm always very sceptical about this technology, but that puts me to rest.
Yeah, and I mean that's often, you know, the old handwritten note on something that someone's done is often what makes or breaks a case. So yeah, it's very important. Any other questions from anyone else? Any comments? Is anyone perhaps who is sceptical about the use of technology? We're all converted. Fantastic. Has anybody used predictive coding previously?
I think we've used the Relativity software, but I'm not certain that we went down the road of the predictive coding.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we found it very, very useful even in the more limited sense in which we did it. We still went through a sort of manual review process with Relativity's assistance, and we had some 35,000 to 38,000 documents to review, and would have been practically impossible to do manually, you know, in a hard copy form. So it definitely made it a lot easier to deal with the volume of electronic data that we had.
And Amelia, did you find that the system was able to group together like documents so that also made your review easier?
Absolutely. I mean, particularly from a perspective of looking at privileged documents, which was really our big concern at that point. It was much, much easier to be able to sort of narrow it down to make sure that we covered off on all of the privileged documents by using various keyword searches and things like that. So yeah, we certainly found it very, very helpful, and we'll look at using it again, and I suspect next time would be much more open to having a look at the predictive coding aspect as well. Our concern, I think, at the time, given that we'd never really done it before, was that it might miss some things.
Yep.
But I feel a lot more comfortable after listening to this today.
And did you find that the technology helped you? Let's say you found some documents and you thought, oh, they're interesting, and it helped you then go down another path of inquiry that potentially you may not have thought of?
That's right. I mean, you could tag them up quite easily, so it was then easier to find other things that were along the same lines. You might not have otherwise been able to review them in the same place as easily.
Which I think is very difficult to do in a traditional linear review, because you know, your paralegals aren't looking at the same sort of things. They could miss it. It's not really, you know, they're only doing sort of what they're told in a narrow sense. So I think it helps.
It was a bit more intuitive, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, please feel free to email us. info@elaw.com.au will find us, or feel free to give us a call, or visit our website, or come to one of us directly if you would like further information. And thank you for your time today.